This is Joyce Pellino Crane, News Director at WestordCAT, and I'm here today with Ellen Harde, who has been our town moderator in Westford since 1993 officially. And you did one extra turn just before that, so this will be coming up. Your 25th town meeting, Ellen?
That's right. I will have moderated 25 annual town meetings.
And Ellen has just recently announced that she is not going to seek re-election for town moderator, and so we're here to find out why.
It just seemed like the right time. There was not one incident that made me think I don't want to do this anymore. My mind works very mathematically, Joyce, and this spring of 2017, my husband Mike and I will have lived in Westford for 50 years. We came in April of 1967. And in that 50 years, I will have moderated half of the annual town meetings. That just seems very right. There's not that I want to do something else. It's not that I don't want to moderate a town meeting. I just think that's a good number of years. There are also two other mathematical things. I started in my 40s and I'm now in my 70s, so I've crossed 4 decades. And I've moderated in 2 centuries. There's nothing more I can accomplish, so it's a good time to hand over the gavel.
Well, it's interesting because last night I was thinking, when I was imagining you not being town moderator, I was imagining you sitting in the, as a voter in one of the seats where we all sit. And it's hard to imagine, but I'm wondering, will you be there?
I will be there, and this is interesting. None of the 3 men who preceded me as moderator in the 50 years I've been here, Ben Drew, John Leggett, or Bill Kavanaugh, ever came back to a town meeting after they stepped down as moderator.
Is that right?
So I thought, oh, maybe they know something that I should be keeping in mind, but I can't not go to town meeting. So I have to just learn to I have to learn to hold my tongue for the first several years. The only thing that I missed in becoming moderator was being on the other side of the podium. I mean, I love to ask the questions, and there will be times as moderator I will be thinking, I just wish a voter would ask this question because I really want to know the answer to this. But you give that up when you're the moderator. You must be moderate. So I will look forward to being in the chairs with the other voters and being back where I was for the first 25 years.
Well, I'll be taking pictures of that.
Okay.
Tell us what town meeting means to you.
Well, you know, when I first came to Westford, I got a phone call literally within weeks of when Mike and I had moved here. I was 22 years old and I was just out of college and a year of intern teaching. And someone said, we're starting a League of Women Voters in Westford. Are you interested? I'd majored in government in college. And had been aware of the League of Women Voters where I grew up, and I said, absolutely, of course. So I got pulled into Westford town government on day 1, and I was just mesmerized by how town government really works versus what you learn in the textbooks about political science and government. And then I went to my first town meeting, and I'd been to town meeting where I grew up, or where I moved in 8th grade. And I realized that one person can stand up at this meeting and express his or her opinions, and you can change the tide of history in that town. And representative town meeting, which is what Chelmsford has, you elect someone to go represent you at town meeting. Westford has an open town meeting. Every single one of our 13,000 voters has the right to go sit in that gymnasium and vote on how much we spend on the schools, what bylaws we're going to pass, every single aspect of town government. That's huge. And so being involved in it as a voter, when Bill Kavanaugh stepped down back in 1993 and asked me if I would run, I thought, well, anything I can do to keep this institution going, especially as Westford was getting bigger, and there were people who said, we're too big, we have to go to representative town meeting. And I desperately wanted the open town meeting to continue. Unfortunately, it has, so that's what kept me going in that.
I've always seen it when I'm sitting there listening and taking notes, I've always seen it as the purest form of democracy.
There's no question about it. You know, Alex de Tocqueville said that in the 18th century when he came to see how this new United States of America was working. And it is absolutely. And then the other thing that people learn, perhaps, because if you don't grow up in New England, the concept of an open town meeting and really being able to go and vote your own conscience, and that 20 minutes later when it's counted, you know how you've affected it. That's a little bit foreign to people who haven't been here. But once they've been to town meeting, and then they see this elected unpaid Board of Selectmen and appointed unpaid Finance Committee, and they realize these are all their neighbors. You know, these aren't pro-government people. These are just people who live here who care passionately about this town. And they get drawn in and sort of think, well, maybe I'll be on the Recreation Commission. And we have more volunteers in government in this town, I think probably anywhere in the Commonwealth. I talk to other moderators. They say they can't get anybody to serve on the Finance Committee. Moderators hold this town government up, and we're so lucky about that.
We are very lucky in Westford. I actually used to cover several other towns for a regional newspaper, and Westford was by far the town that had the most volunteers, and very dedicated volunteers.
Yeah. It's extraordinary, and it doesn't seem to be waning, even as people's lives get more complicated, and they are still there. And you know, the Saturday town meetings, we start out with 500 or 600 people. That's a lot. I mean, the U.S. Senate's only 100. Even the House of Representatives isn't as much as we have on that particular Saturday. So it just means a lot, and I hope it means a lot to the people who perhaps don't know about it yet and will learn about it.
So I want to get off track a little bit and just ask you, what brought you to Westford in 1967?
My husband, Mike, had just gotten out of graduate school. I had just finished a year interning at a school, so I was going to become a teacher. We wanted to buy our first house because we'd been in the Air Force for 3 years and hadn't owned a home. And so Mike had been accepted to work at a bank in Boston. So he needed to be able to get on a train. And we kept going further and further west until we found a house we could afford. That's what it was. We just followed the train tracks. And our poor realtor had been with us every weekend and said, just get in the car. I'm taking you to Westford, which I'd heard of but didn't know anything about. And she showed us 3 houses, all near the center. And then she showed us a house on Lincoln Street right next to Ed Connolly's insurance office. And it had a for sale sign, not her firm. And Mike asked, how about that one? And she said, it doesn't meet any of the parameters of what you told me you want in a house. And I don't have the listing, but I happen to know it's vacant and we can crawl in through a shed window. So we walked down the driveway and we climbed in a window and we opened the kitchen door, and Mike and I just immediately knew. We knew nothing about Westford, nothing. We just knew this house facing Westford Common just felt right. We were going to stay here a few years, you know, until we could afford to live closer to Boston, and never saw any reason to leave. Yeah. The following year, our son Christopher arrived in our lives, and then in '69 we adopted Joshua. And what a town to grow up in. It was just perfect. They could walk to the library, which they didn't do much, but they could walk to Frost, they could walk to Abbott. They never got on the school bus until they got to the academy. It was just so serendipitous that we ended up here. Yeah.
Yes, it seems magical.
Yeah, really is. We're so lucky, so lucky.
So, going back to when you decided to run for town moderator, what led to that?
Well, you know, I'd never thought about it. I loved being on the other side of the podium and asking questions at town meeting. I've sometimes wondered if maybe I was asked to run because people were tired of me being on that side of the podium and it would keep me quieter. But the man who was my predecessor, Bill Cavanaugh, actually called me sometime in the early '80s and said, there's a special town meeting coming up, I can't be there, would you fill in for me? We didn't get a quorum, so I just adjourned the meeting, and that was my first try at it. But then in 1992, Bill Cavanaugh called me up and said, I can't make the annual town meeting. I've scheduled a fishing trip with friends and I can't get out of it. Would you moderate the town meeting? And I found out later that he was working slowly to ask me if I would run to be moderator, but naively, that never occurred to me. And then in 1993, he chose not to run for a 7th term. And there I was, having run the town meeting in '92, finding I was pretty good at it, but had a lot to learn. So I took out nomination papers to run for election.
And you won that first election?
I did. I was opposed by a gentleman, Roy Chasen. So that was good, because most people don't even know the moderator is an elected position. So by having a contest, it became clear. Then for the next 7 elections, I haven't been opposed. Another good reason to bow out, perhaps, at this point in time. So that was the only contest, was back in 1993.
And through the 24, 25 years, are there any moments that stand out for you that really, you remember?
Well, I remember my first town meeting, the one that Bill said that he couldn't make, which I believe this was the 92 town meeting. There was one in the fall, and it was very controversial about rezoning down on Route 110. It was too big for the Abbott Gym. We were down at Westford Academy, and there were 1,100 and something voters there. And that was either my first or second town meeting. That one I will never forget. But we got through it, and everybody was so gracious. And but the two, I think, moments that I remember the most, one was sort of humorous. After I became moderator, there's a group called the Mass Moderators Association, and we all get together once a year and compare notes. And I learned that many towns do what's called a pro and con microphone. So if you want to speak in favor, you stand in this line. If you want to speak opposed, and as moderator, that allows me to balance the conversation. So you hear from somebody opposed, against, and it gives people an opportunity to hear both. So we had an article that was on by petition, which means the selectmen hadn't placed it on it. A group of voters had signed it. And it was asking to amend the town's zoning bylaws to allow restaurants to have drive-up windows. You can't do that in Westford. Banks can have them, pharmacies can have them, but restaurants can't. So the attorney for the restaurant spoke in favor, and I looked up and said, I'll now take people from the pro and con microphone. And there were 25 people in the against line, and there was nobody in the in favor line, except for the attorney for the applicant. And I took 2 or 3, and I said to the town meeting, I have a feeling that this town meeting has decided how it's going to vote on this. Shall I call for the vote? We were only about 5 minutes into the debate. And everyone said, yes! So I called for the vote, and to no one's surprise, it was defeated. But there were 2 things about that. It showed that the pro and con microphone was sort of a little bellwether, to see how the town meeting is thinking, because there's no point spending debate on something that the voters know what they're going to do. So that was sort of that's funny and that's validating. The second one was a very touching town meeting, and I believe it was in February of 2007, perhaps, that the town was deciding whether or not to purchase East Boston Camps.
I think that would have been 2005.
Thank you.
That's when Westford bought
the land. It was February 7th of 2005. I knew there was a 7 in there somewhere. And it was proposed that we take a lot of $13 million of community preservation money and put it toward acquiring that property. And Nancy Rosinski was on the Board of Selectmen. She was on the board of directors as well of the Westford Land Preservation Foundation, which had been working on this project for a long time. And she stood up and gave a talk that you could have heard a pin drop. I mean, everyone was listening to what she was saying. And she ended her comments, I won't get this verbatim, but I should because I have it written down upstairs in my desk. Let history show that when this town meeting voted on this opportunity to acquire this land, that the vote was unanimous. And at that point in time, we'd already hear from the proponents, the opponents. Someone stood up and moved the question, which meant let's end debate and just vote now. And that passed. People said we're ready to make up our minds. So I called for those in favor, and there were a bunch of ayes, and I called for those opposed, and there wasn't a peep. And the moment I said, this motion, I gotta cry, this motion passes unanimously, everyone knew that it was what Nancy Rosinski had said, that that power of one had just been so demonstrably proven at that moment. It was so powerful. And nobody said anything for several seconds. It was just dead silence. Everybody was just sort of, wow, could this have happened? So that, I will never forget that moment.
It's interesting that to hear you tell this story because I wasn't there that night, but I was covering it for a regional paper, and I had a friend who was there who called me immediately after, and his description exactly matched.
Oh,
yours.
isn't that interesting? I didn't know if the
never
voters
forget
felt
that.
the same way.
Yeah.
Oh, it was so powerful. It really was. It was just the culmination of all this. It was something. And I think, you know, even if it had gone the other way, if one person had spoken that passionately, had really convinced a lot of people. I mean, I'm not sure how many were in that gymnasium that night, but I bet it was 800 or 900 people. That's, as I say, that's strong stuff.
That was powerful.
Yeah.
For to be the town moderator and to manage a meeting as well as you do, as tightly as you do, how much of a learning curve was there to learn the rules and the protocol?
Well, you know, having been on the other side of the podium and having gone to town meeting for the previous 25 years, we missed the first town meeting. It had been held in March when we got here in April, so I missed the 1967 town meeting, but we went in '68. And so I had been there for so long. I saw how it worked, and I was familiar with parliamentary procedure, but I'd seen, you know, as I said, my three predecessors do that. I also had the advantage, Joyce, of having been there and being very involved in town government. I mean, I was lots of boards and committees up through those 25 years. I knew who the cast of characters was, and I knew the personalities, and that's invaluable. So for me still, it's very important to go to all the planning board hearings before a town meeting, all the selectmen's meetings, the zoning board of appeals, any group that might have input at a school committee, so that when we get to the town meeting, I know who's who. And I also know what the pressure points are. I know who's feeling strongly. I know where the opposition might be. That makes it so much easier to balance the discussion. So I think those were the two things that I already had in my pocket, just from having been a town meeting goer. And I've tried to continue to do that through this Mass Moderators Association. They have a wonderful book that's called Town Meeting Time that was written by 3 moderators in the 1960s that takes Robert's Rules of Order and condenses it to the town meeting. We don't need all the things they have in Congress. And so that, actually, I proposed to the town meeting that we adopted that rather than Robert's Rules of Order as our guide. So I learned from other moderators, and thank you for the compliment that you think I've done an okay job. But those were the things that I did.
I think it's a unanimous impression by everybody in Westford.
Thank you. Thank you.
You've done a good job.
Thank you. Well, you know, the night that I was elected back in 1993, I got a phone call, this was before the days of email, from my brother-in-law who congratulated me as the least moderate woman he knew. I thought it was ironic that I was moderator. And that's been a challenge because I am a strong opinioned woman. So to appear moderate and to keep a balanced discussion is a challenge. And so if I've been able to achieve that, thank you.
And that brings me to my last question,
yes,
which is, for anyone who is considering running for town moderator in May, what advice would you give to that person?
Well, number one, go to the town clerk's office and take out your nomination papers because Patty Doobie announced last week that they are available and they need to be filed a day in March that I wrote down. But
Patty Doobie is the assistant
I'm
town
the assistant
clerk.
Town clerk, right. So this was at the selectmen's meeting where she also doubles as their minute taker. So do know that you need to get nomination papers. It's not a lot of signatures. Anyone can do that. I would say consider your diplomacy skills, I guess. You know, you just can't go to the annual town meeting and be the moderator and have any personal vendettas or feelings about anybody. You cannot have an opinion on anything that's on the warrant. You just have to be completely neutral. And, you know, I'll meet somebody at the bank and they'll say, you know, just between you and me, what do you think about Article 7? And I just say, I am absolutely neutral. I am absolutely moderate. And even my wonderful husband, Mike, who's put up with this for 25 years, I don't think usually he has any idea how I feel about the issue. So they have to be willing to put their personal, not biases, their personal opinions aside and just look at it completely neutrally. And it's the process that's important. It's not the content. I will literally come home and Mike will say, how did things go on Article 12? And I'll say, I don't really have any idea, but I remember that there was a motion to, dismiss, and there was a motion to amend. I remember how the sausage came together, but I don't even remember if it passed or didn't pass or what it was. So they have to be very process-oriented and being able to put the process in front of the subject matter of the articles.
Wonderful advice.
Yeah, yeah.
So town meeting is March 25th?
There, Saturday the 25th.
Saturday the 25th of March at the Abbott School, and 10 o'clock?
10 o'clock, and I might just say that there's even a special town meeting for people who want to get a little warm up. By petition, a group of residents have asked for a special town meeting to amend one portion of our bylaw, and that's February 6th, which is a Monday night, also at the Abbott School. And for that, we require 200 voters. There is no quorum. There's no minimum number of voters for the annual town meeting. So it could be myself and the chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and we could do it. But for a special town meeting. So special town meeting February 6th.
At what time?
That's at 7:30 in the evening.
7:30.
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
so special town meeting February 6th.
Right.
And annual town meeting where the budget is decided.
Absolutely.
And many other articles.
Right.
That will take place on March 25th,
Right.
beginning at 10 a.m.
Right. Everyone will receive the Finance Committee recommendations, so everyone in town will receive in the mail a book that tells them every dollar that's being spent and what all of the articles or pieces of business are, so everybody gets a chance to put their finger in the water.
Well, thank you, Ellen.
Oh, Joyce, you were nice to ask.
I enjoyed this so much.
Thank you.
I wish you the best of luck in whatever you decide to do beyond being town moderator, but I know there'll be a lot of projects.
I promise I'm not leaving town.
For WestordCAT, this is Joyce Pellino Crane.